You check your bank balance before you fall asleep. You compare your salary to your neighbor's car. You measure your worth quietly in numbers you did not choose. But rewind far enough, and that entire system disappears. So what did wealth even mean before money existed at all? The answer will unsettle you. For most of human history, the people who had the least were often the richest in time, in leisure, in freedom. That is not a romantic exaggeration. It is what the evidence actually shows. Start with a study that shocked anthropology itself. In 1966, at a symposium called Man the Hunter, anthropologist Marshall Sahlins presented research on hunter-gatherer societies like the Juhwanzi of the Kalahari. He argued something radical. These were not desperate people scraping by. Sahlins called them the original affluent society. How can people with almost no possessions be called affluent? Because affluence, Sahlins argued, is not about how much you have. It is about the gap between your wants and what you can get. Hunter-gatherer groups often worked only a few hours a day to meet their needs. The rest of the time was spent resting, socializing, storytelling. Their wealth was not stacked in a vault. It was living, breathing time. Compare that to your own week. How many hours do you spend earning money for things you don't actually need? Now, this doesn't mean prehistoric life was easy. Disease, violence, and early death were real dangers, and no one is suggesting you trade your antibiotics for a spear. But the point stands. Wealth, for early humans, was not primarily about accumulation. It was about access. Access to food, to kin, to safety, to time. So when did that change? When did humans start measuring worth in things instead of moments? Archaeologist Ian Hodder, who spent decades excavating the Neolithic site of Çatalhöyük in modern Turkey, found something telling. Even in one of the earliest large farming settlements on Earth, homes were remarkably similar in size and contents. No mansions, no slums. Wealth, if it existed at all, was distributed almost evenly across the community. Farming should have changed everything. It let people store surplus grain for the first time in history. Surplus meant some families could hoard more than others. And yet, at Çatalhöyük, that inequality barely shows up in the archaeological record. Why not? If you could hoard, why wouldn't you? The answer might be social pressure. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm, who studied both contemporary foraging societies and the deep roots of human cooperation, argued that early human groups actively suppressed attempts to dominate or accumulate too much. If someone tried to hoard resources or boss others around, the group would mock them, shame them, or simply walk away and leave them behind. Imagine trying to become the richest person in your community, only to watch everyone quietly stop inviting you to dinner. This wasn't kindness for its own sake. It was survival strategy. In small mobile groups, cooperation kept everyone alive. A person who hoarded food while others starved threatened the whole band. So egalitarianism wasn't an accident. It was enforced deliberately by social consequence. But something even stranger happened once humans figured out how to build genuine surplus. Wealth didn't just accumulate. In some cultures, it got destroyed on purpose. Consider the potlatch ceremonies practiced by indigenous nations of the Pacific Northwest coast, including the Kwakwaka'wakw and Tlingit peoples. Early anthropologist Franz Boas documented these events in detail in the late 19th century. At a potlatch, a wealthy host didn't hoard resources to show status. They gave enormous quantities of goods away. Sometimes they destroyed valuable items outright, burning blankets, breaking prized copper shields in front of witnesses. Why would anyone deliberately destroy their own wealth? Because in that system, status wasn't built by keeping. It was built by giving. The person who could afford to give away the most or destroy the most proved they had more than enough. Wealth was a performance of generosity, not a private stockpile. Your worth was measured by what you released into the world, not what you locked away from it. That idea should sound almost backwards to you. And that's exactly the point. More recently, anthropologist David Graeber and archaeologist David Wengrow, in their research later published as The Dawn of Everything, argued that early human societies experimented constantly with different systems of wealth, status, and power. Some were rigidly hierarchical. Others deliberately flattened hierarchy, sometimes seasonally, gathering into large, complex groups for part of the year and dispersing into smaller, more equal groups the rest of the time. This matters because it destroys a myth you've probably absorbed without noticing. The myth that human history moves in one direction, from primitive equality to modern hierarchy, as if inequality were some natural, inevitable outcome of progress. Graeber and Wengrow's research suggests early humans were not trapped on that path. They were actively choosing, again and again, what kind of society they wanted to live in. So if wealth wasn't always about hoarding, what was it actually measuring? In many early societies, real wealth looked like relationships. It looked like how many people would help you when you were sick, how many alliances you had if conflict came to your door, how many stories were told about your generosity around a fire at night. You couldn't eat status, but status, built through giving, could buy you protection that gold never could. Even burial evidence tells this story. Archaeologists studying some of the earliest human graves have found that the most elaborately decorated burials were not always the ones with the most goods. Sometimes they belonged to individuals the community clearly valued for other reasons. Healers, elders, people who held the group together through skill or wisdom rather than material accumulation. What would your own life look like if your worth were measured that way? It's tempting to imagine prehistoric humans as poor, desperate ancestors we've slowly, painfully evolved beyond. But that story flatters the present far more than it deserves. Many early human societies had systems of wealth that were more flexible, more socially embedded, and in some cases more resistant to extreme inequality than anything you interact with today. None of this means you should abandon money or that modern economies are some tragic mistake. Complexity brought real benefits: medicine, infrastructure, the ability to support billions of people who would never have survived in small foraging bands. But it's worth remembering that the specific shape of wealth you live inside, salaries, savings accounts, credit scores, is not the only shape humans have ever built. It's not even, historically speaking, the most common one. Every time you feel that quiet anxiety about how much you have compared to someone else, you are participating in one particular experiment in human history. Not the only one, not necessarily the most natural one, just the one you happen to be born into. So the next time you check your bank balance before falling asleep, ask yourself a stranger question. Not how much do I have, but what would the people who lived before money, before hoarding, before the whole idea of net worth have actually called rich? The answer was never in your wallet. It was always in your time, your people, and what you were willing to give away. The more we learn about the past, the better we understand ourselves. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Phoenix Primeval for more fascinating stories from history, science, and human evolution. Thanks for watching.